Legendary Pokemon are some of the coolest features in VGC, and while a lot of fans really dislike them in competitive, I think they bring a pretty important balance to the metagames they're allowed in. While your least favorite Pokemon to fight might be something like a Calyrex Shadow Rider or even Miraidon, they both offer a lot of unique qualities to the format, and I don't necessarily think, at least for VGC, that either are too overwhelming. I want to try and give us some more unique options for Legendary Pokemon though, since specifically in Scarlet and Violet, we don't have a lot of options for some of these types. So I want to give every single type of Pokemon a new Legendary in Scarlet and Violet. With this in mind, we're going to take some Pokemon that already exist in the franchise and buff their stats in order to try and make them a bit more on par with these box arts. I'm going to possibly also add on things like an extra typing, ability, and even just in occasion some extra moves that might hopefully also help with these Pokemon, as just because we give a Pokemon like Cacturne a better stat line doesn't make it exactly a really good Pokemon suddenly. We will, however, mostly be focusing on stats here, and if you guys want to see me do a part 2 to this where I can cover a Pokemon that you guys might really like that I missed, let's try and get this video to 300 likes and I'll do a second part to this. Maybe not with as many Pokemon, but we'll still cover a good amount. Also, if you enjoy the content, consider becoming a member, which for just a couple dollars a month, it's a nice way to support the channel, and I'll cover any member Pokemon especially if you guys have any that you want to see. With that said though, we have 18 new legendaries today, so let's not hesitate with any of these. We have plenty to go over. First though, I do want to go over a bit more in depth our rules today. We're going to start by keeping at least the type that I'm basing the legend around. So for example, if I'm choosing Scolipede as a bug type, I have to keep the bug type for Scolipede, but I can get rid of poison for another type like rock or fire, or I can even just drop it to a single bug type entirely if we felt like doing that. We're also going to be primarily adjusting his stats, and in order to keep these in line with the average box art legendary, we're going to go between 650 and 680 BSC, which is a pretty common stat line for a lot of these. I do want to also be very careful with the moves we'll be adding on, so to make things interesting, I'm going to be limiting every Pokemon to just 4 new moves at most. And while there is one Pokemon that exceeds this, it's for a very specific reason that I'll get into when we cover that. Finally, for good measure, we're going to be looking into changing abilities where needed, since there are a lot of Pokemon that have at least some really useless abilities like Anticipation that just don't do anything. So while we will be changing out some abilities, for anything that has an exclusive ability, like for example Age/Stance Change, if I was to modify that, I will at least keep the original intention in place and just make it better. When discussing legendaries for today's video, a lot of these ideas were actually bounced off of my good pal Nick Morales, who not only won the Baltimore Regional Championship, but also ended up commissioning the biggest VGC draft league of all time, the WBG, which I'll actually link down below if you guys are interested in joining. And one Pokemon that Nick in particular wanted me to cover today was Golisopod. Now Golisopod was a huge missed opportunity here, since starting off with Emergency Exit, this is a pretty terrible ability that was so close to being good. We're going to try and tweak this by now making it so that way then whenever either Golisopod uses a priority move or is a target of a priority move, it ends up immediately switching out regardless of the damage it takes. This means that whether Golisopod uses a move like First Impression or Aqua Jet, or if you get hit by something like a Prankster Thunder Wave or even an Extreme Speed Dragonite, you'll get to switch out into some other target, which can give a lot of different initiative here. Especially considering this is a bug type with the move First Impression as Stab, this is already very powerful. But just to make sure we'll go the extra mile here, we're going to add on Fake Out, Helping Hand, and Follow Me, which should lean very heavy into this new Emergency Exit buff. Just to be safe here, we're going to also add on to its bulk and offense, since I think especially with the newfound bulk that this legendary Golisopod would have, it'd be a pretty good tank, and with 155 attack especially, this could be a really powerful first impression it would go for. And while I think this Golisopod is definitely one of the weaker legendaries today, I think it, at least for a bug type legend, is a really cool concept, since Bug Water is just such a good defensive typing for bug. Now, one of the coolest new Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet is easily Kingambit. Kingambit's a Pokemon that honestly just looks like a legendary, but it also thankfully doesn't need that many buffs. Its stats are already pretty good, but similar to Golisopod, I do want to raise its attack a little bit as well as its defensive stats. I think the primary focus here is especially going to be the special defense, where we're going to be raising this to 135, which should help a lot with combating opposing Psychic and Ghost types, especially ones that have good coverage for Kingambit. While I think the HP and Speed F especially will help with an Assault Vest, you can actually go really far with this with a little bit of investment by even just making sure that you can take hits like Choice Specs Goldengo Focus Blast, which is a pretty big deal since with just an Assault Vest and a little bit of investment, you could just take that 4 times effective hit. This Kingambit would truly be box art worthy in my opinion, but for good measure, I do want to add on some new offensive moves through Drain Punch, Ice Punch, and Knock Off especially, which will be a pretty huge deal for Kingambit. Now I know Kingambit's already a strong Pokemon in doubles, but if you were a singles player and fighting this, I think you'd be very terrified, since this Kingambit would probably be even broken for the likes of Smogon Ubers, or especially in Uber's draft league setting such as the BBL, which if you're a fan of Uber's Draft League, it's actually going on right now, and a lot of former people, of course, who might know me from way back in the day would know I actually played in singles, and this was the draft league that I ran, so seeing it back on Wi-Fi, of course, really big deal. And if you're interested in other legendary focused content, great league to check out. I'll link the playlist for all the draft analysis in the description below if that's up in time for this video. Regardless though, this Supreme Overlord Kingambit would be such a monster in a format like that, and I would have loved to maybe see a concept like this that has that terrifying ability as a box art. I think it would have been really cool, and it was an unfortunate missed opportunity here. Well, I think Kingambit is the best base of a Pokemon we're buffing today. I think this next one might be one of the strongest buffs we gave to any legendary today. The Scarlet and Violet DLC gave us a new evolution for Applin in the form of Hydrapple, the only 2-stage evolution for this Pokemon. Now Hydrapple is objectively really cool, and it is a clear upgrade compared to its counterparts, especially Flapple, but it could honestly have been so much more. Now I do want to keep the intent of making this a trick room attacker and invest generally into the defensive stats as well as the special attack. Now I did keep this rather tame at only 140 special attack here, but that's for good reason. Because of the fact that we're going to be giving us Contrary over Sticky Hold, I did want to waste a little bit of points by investing 20 more into its physical attack. Since with Leaf Storm and Draco Meteor for contrary boosting options, this will be a very terrifying threat. For good measure though, I do want to add on Flamethrower and Synthesis to this Pokemon's moveset as a good way to hit Pokemon like Corviknight for super effective, while also giving it some built-in recovery, which should help a lot in all honesty. This will be a very monstrous option with Trick Room in my opinion, and it's going to be a very good Pokemon to get around. And while it will still be able to get outran by Pokemon like Hatterene and Torkoal in Trick Room, at the same time though, its bulk is good enough to where this shouldn't be a big deal. I do need to really quickly clarify, not every Pokemon we're going to go over today is going to be a Trick Room attacker. It just so happens the first 3 types in the ABC order are more Trick Room focused, but I can assure you that we will have some faster options on the horizon. But our next pick though is unfortunately going to be another bulky option for anyone who's not a fan of Trick Room. When talking about a lot of electric type legendaries, you typically think of fast ones like Tapu Koko and Miraidon, but one Pokemon I think we should probably look into making a legendary is Electros, as it's a really unique concept for one. As a pure electric type with Levitate, it has 0 weaknesses, which I think could be a very interesting concept to explore for a legendary. With an extra 155 BST, we can pretty evenly spread all these stats around, and I gave every stat besides special attack an extra 15 to 30 points here, with the special attack raising by base 50. I think with the addition of Calm Mind, in tandem with our 155 special attack here, this will be a very powerful special option to set up and win with moves like Discharge, Giga Drain, and Flamethrower to help. Meanwhile, if you do still want to run the physical stat, its physical attack is pretty powerful, and with options like Coil, this could be pretty potent. But for good measure, I did want to add on Leech Life, as while Drain Punch is still a good option to recover with, I think Leech Life hits a bit better into these grass types at the very least that will be resisting your electric stab, so I think it'll be a bit of an important option here. I also want to add on Life too, since with the more defensive oriented setup moves that Electros would now have, I don't want to give it straight up recover necessarily, as especially with having 0 weaknesses, I think this might be a bit overkill here. And Electros will be bulky enough at this point to where only getting 25% but also healing up a partner could be pretty useful. Now, Generation 8 gave us a lot of cool new Pokemon, and I think one of my favorites from this gen has to be Alcremie. I'm a huge sucker for these Pokemon that have the small aesthetic form changes, and with the minor cosmetic differences, you can get a lot of cool picks from Alcremie specifically, to where it's a legendary that you would always just have fun running on your team. As a pure Fairy type too, Alcremie has a lot to work with, and especially with the move Decorate and its supportive move pool, this is a very terrifying pick for a legendary. We're going to start by buffing all of its defensive stats by 30 points, with a 40 boost to its HP specifically. We're going to still bring its special attack up a little bit, though it's more meant to be on your team as a really bulky support, similar to a Pokemon like Ho-Oh would be. Though since Ho-Oh can have 130 physical attack, I don't exactly think raising Alcremie to 135 special attack is going to be asking too much here. For its new moves, I want to add on Trick Room, Follow Me, and Nasty Plot, as I think these will all be very powerful, with Trick Room and Follow Me leaning more towards those supportive roles, with Nasty Plot benefiting because Alcremie does have at least a good enough set of coverage. Finally, I want to introduce the G-Max move as just a normal move on Alcremie, since in Generation 8, this was an offensive Fairy type move that healed both you and your ally by 1/6 of the damage you did. I think with base 80 power, this would be pretty in line with the Veltal's Oblivion Wing, another signature move from a box art legendary that does base 80 power, but it heals the Veltal specifically by 75%. Now, if you have any ideas for this move in particular, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. I'm thinking Just Desserts would be a pretty cool name, but I'm unsure if it fits perfectly for Alcremie. I think it at least kind of works here though. Finally, for good measure, since Scarlet and Violet's really hurting from Misty Terrain Setters though, I do want to add on Misty Surge as an ability for the second slot, since Alcremie only has one normal ability and a hidden ability, and I think this would be a pretty cool option that could at least compete with Xerneas for that Fairy type box art spot. For our fighting type pick, I feel like we have a really clear option, and from Generation 8, I feel like this is the best pick. Phalanx has got to be one of the biggest missed opportunities as a fighting type in the entire franchise. It is a really cool signature move through no retreat, and a really awful stat line, unfortunately. As a pure fighting type though, I think if we just improve its speed, it could do a lot of work. We're going to buff its speed all the way up to 140, essentially nearly doubling it. But with no retreat at +1, this will allow you to outrun options like Iron Bundle, which means that you want it to fear Icy Wind. You'll still have Define, of course, in case it gets one off on the turn you set up in no retreat, but I think at least this will help a lot with just making you a lot more potent. Now, a lot of people might be thinking this is a bit overkill on a Pokemon that's going to get an Omni boost for its signature move, but at the same time though, I would personally argue that for a pure fighting type Pokemon, as well as the fact that you're committing your box art to never switching out again, this is a pretty big handicap to be holding, and I think at least a Pokemon that has to deal with this much of a handicap should at least get 140 speed, if not even faster. I didn't want to go too fast though, since I still want to invest somewhat into the defenses to make the no retreat defense boost a bit more powerful, so we're going to raise his HP to 105, defense to 115, and special defense base 90, which for a Pokemon like this is by no means bad, and in tandem with its now 140 attack stat, this should be pretty powerful. Finally, we're going to give it Spiky Shield as a better means of protect, and Sucker Punch, which will help in case we fight a faster threat with no retreat, and I think we have a pretty powerful pure fighting type that can actually wreak havoc viably. As for a fire type, I really wanted to buff Incineroar, but I figured you guys would have eaten me alive for buffing only one starter in the Alola trio, so we're going to actually pick Scovillain, which is still a pretty cool option. As a chlorophyll sweeping fire type, this has a lot of good picks, but unfortunately it's missing a few different options. We'll start by buffing both offensive stats to 138 and giving it a better speed stat at 106. From here, we'll give some minor buffs to the defensive stats and HP, buffing them all up to base 91. While I think chlorophyll would suffice as an ability, I do want to also change Insomnia for solar power here, giving us a really fast Choice Scarf route that you could do in order to keep the speed in case if Sun's not there anymore. For moves, I want to add on Heat Wave so we can finally have a spread fire type option, as well as Earth Power to help with these more specially oriented movesets for fire type coverage. I'm also going to add on Flare Blitz, which will be a really cool powerful physical stab on the fire side since it currently doesn't have a great one. Meanwhile, its grass type physical moves are already pretty good, and it has Stomping Tantrum at least to hit the fire type Pokemon similar to how it would have Earth Power. For that fourth move that we'll be giving Scovillain, I want to add on Sleep Powder since every viable chlorophyll Pokemon has Sleep Powder, and I feel like Scovillain just kind of needs it to be good. When planning out these legendary Pokemon with Hopeless, we both kind of agreed that for this flying type spot, the pick had to be Sigilyph. It just kind of feels like Sigilyph was always meant to be a legendary, and I feel like its design being not a legendary Pokemon just feels kind of wrong here. And let's just say, I think this is probably going to be one of the best ones we do for sure. Now, Psychic and Flying is a really terrible typing, but I think for the stat line that we gave it, I think it kind of works. We're going to drop Wonder Skin for No Guard before we even get to the stats though, and we're going to add on both Focus Blast and Hurricane for moves. I also give it Psychic Noise since while I think that Expanding Force will be strictly better, at the same time though, this really only works if you either Terra out of your terrible typing or if you give it an Iron Ball hold. So Psychic Noise at least helps with the movesets that we may be going for something like such as a Life Orb, Focus Sash, or even just the Choice Specs. Because of the fact that this is a Psychic type though that can't comfortably take advantage of Expanding Force, I do want to give it a really good offensive stat line. So we're going to be buffing its speed to 157, making it the fastest box art of all time, while also giving it a 143 special attack stat, which will allow it to hit very hard with these really high base power offensive boosts. Well, I think that No Guard 143 special attack Hurricane in tandem with that 157 speed might be a bit overkill. At the same time though, Psychic Flying is probably a really bad defensive typing as we've seen from Lugia at the very least. And while this is far more offensively suited for that typing, at the same time, you can get pretty easily revenge killed by a lot of priority even with Psychic Terrain up due to the fact that you are a flying type. So I don't really think that it has a lot of difficult counterplay per se, since most common Sucker Punch Pokemon will probably at least be able to claim an OHKO on this without Terra. It still has an uphill battle due to that typing, but it's really give or take here, and I think it at least is an average legendary for this list. For a ghost type spot, I wanted to give a shout out to our channel member Zeke0, as I know he's a huge fan of this Pokemon, so we picked Golurk. Now Golurk's a really interesting pick, since I think a lot of the best ground types in Trick Room are these slower tankier builds like Rhyperior and the Ursalunas, but I think Golurk unfortunately misses out on the high power ground type move Headlong Rush that would help a lot. We're going to also give it Trick Room, as I think this would be a very cool means to separate it from these other Trick Room ground types, since you would actually have a way to set the speed control on your own. We're also going to change out Klutz for the ability Contrary, which in tandem with Headlong Rush and Superpower would make Golurk into a very quick snowballing tank both offensively and defensively. As for stats, I'm going to skew more towards these defensive stats, as Golurk is really lacking compared to other Trick Room certain threats, though we are still going to buff its physical attack to 164, making it the highest physical attacking Pokemon on today's list. I think a moveset with options like Headlong Rush, Poltergeist, Trick Room, and Protect, regardless if you use No Guard or Contrary, would be a really sick option for Golurk, and I think it would finally be relevant in VGC. If you've been following me for a bit, I'm sure a lot of you guys know I'm a huge believer in Sunflora, but for some reason, no one else really sees the vision here. So today, I'm going to force you all to start respecting this Pokemon by first changing its typing, making it into a Grass and Fire typing. While I know this competes with Scovillain as another Fire and Grass type legendary Pokemon, I think just to make sure that we're going to differentiate it a bit, this is one, going to be skewed much more towards Trick Room, and two, we're going to actually allow this to set Drought by changing out Early Bird for Drought here. With this in mind, Sunflora, the Pokemon with Sun in its name, will finally have 3 Sun-focused abilities with Solar Power, Chlorophyll, and Drought, though I still think a Solar Power would probably be the best case here. With this newfound Fire typing though, we can't just settle for Weather Ball as a Fire stab, so we're going to add on both Heat Wave and Flamethrower here, as these are both pretty important staples. We're going to also invest mostly to improve every stat here besides speed, which we'll actually deduct 5 points from, allowing you to now outpace Pokemon like Hatterene with Trick Room up. Now, similar to other Pokemon like Hydropple here, we did invest a fair bit of points into attack, as with Solar Power, I felt like Sunflora actually could get out of hand pretty quickly with 165 special attack and the really incredible bulk, so I wanted to waste 30 points here by giving them the physical attack, because Sunflora's stats are just so bad otherwise that we had a lot of points to improve with this. I think if we even just continue to raise the special attack even further than 165, this would have gotten overkill very quick, and by making this into a bulkier Pokemon in any of those stats by just another 10 points, this would have been a pretty big deal here. Now moving on to Whiscash. Whiscash is a pretty awesome pick, and I've fallen in love with this Pokemon as a ground type in Scarlet and Violet. While Whiscash is objectively pretty terrible, I had a lot of fun using it in Regulation D, at least for some gimmick formats that I did, such as a Rental Cup format I participated in during NISC of 2023, and I'd love to see it get some more legendary stats, especially because this is one of the few Pokemon that's actually been banned in the anime, and I think we should start seeing it banned in some VGC formats too while we're at it. Let's start off by increasing its stats overall with a very heavy focus towards its bulk and physical attack. We're going to also change out 2 abilities in this Pokemon, making it the first of a couple Pokemon that will do more than one ability change for, changing out both Hydration and Oblivious for Water Bubble and Simple respectively. With Water Bubble, this will lean very heavily into these choice banded movesets with moves like Liquidation to boast. Meanwhile, with Simple, we can take advantage of both Curse and Dragon Dance's very viable setup here, allowing you to very quickly snowball. Simple is a big reason why I only wanted to give the speed a base 10 increase to base 70, since with plus 2 speed off of 1 Dragon Dance, this still outruns a lot of threats in VGC, but you could still use this with a Curse moveset on a Trick Room team, and with minus 2 speed, you'll actually underpace a fair bit of the metagame still. With this in mind, I only really had 2 moves that I actually needed to add to its moveset, the first being Calm Mind, which will still take advantage of its fairly respectable 98 special attack, though I think the physical attack being 138 will be a lot better here anyway. Because of this, I still want to give it a physical Ice type move, which we're going to be giving it Ice Spinner, which should honestly be a really powerful option, and unlike a move such as Ice Punch or Triple Axle, I think at least it's very difficult to argue that this has a common trend of Pokemon that it gets, because really just Ice Spinner kind of goes on everything at this point in Generation 9. One of Kanto's fan favorite Pokemon has got to be Lapras, and I think it's a really cool Ice type pick for sure, but it's just shy of being a really strong legendary. As an Ice type, it has a pretty uphill battle, but I think I found a way to make this Pokemon truly legendary. We're going to start out by changing out Water Absorb for Storm Drain, as this will be a very powerful ability that can actually draw in opposing water type moves. And just for good measure, we're going to also change out Hydration for Snow Warning, making this into a now bulky Snow Setter that can take advantage of that Ice typing and make it into a benefit. We're going to increase a lot of its stats overall, but the biggest one is going to be its special attack, raising it from 85 to 145, with some minor buffs in every other stat besides speed. For moves, we're going to give it Calm Mind to finally give Lapras a good special setup option, and we're going to add on Gmax Resonance as a move, though I really don't know what to name it. With an easy way to set up Veil without the need for an opposing weather setter, this will be a truly terrifying option that I think will wreak havoc on a lot of teams. A lot of you guys have asked me to look into buffing gimmick normal types, so here's your kind of teaser for this, as we're going to be looking into Castform. Now, Castform is going to be our only Pokemon with an exclusive ability besides Golisopod that we're actually going to be reworking here, as now, instead of the fact that Castform will just get a form change here, it's also going to make it so any weather set up by Castform will be permanent even if Castform dies. I think this will make Castform have a legitimate niche as the king of weather in VGC, and in tandem with the ability Forecast getting reworked, we're going to also add on that Ghost typing, allowing it a much better defensive typing than just pure normal, making it so you have a complete fake out immunity to have a much easier time setting your weather condition here. We're going to focus the buffs mostly to speed, bring it to 155, making it only outran by Sigilyph, and we'll also give it a really powerful special attack set at base 130, which should take advantage of a lot of these other special moves we've added on, such as Eruption, Water Spout, Bleak Windstorm, and Meteor Beam. Since Castform already had Blizzard for the snow form, I don't really think it needs anything more than just Eruption and Meteor Beam for these types of movesets stats anyway, and with Eruption and Water Spout, these are two very powerful stabs to lean into the Sun and Rain form respectively. I think as opposed to other weather setters such as Pelipper and Groudon, while these picks are probably objectively better Pokemon for a team, the fact that Castform can just kind of lock any weather in place no matter what would be a pretty big deal. And despite being a legendary Pokemon that has only base 95, 100, 100 for bulk and a pure normal and ghost typing to start off with, I think this would still at least be a pretty good pick. Game Freak, if you want to see these buffs for Generation 10, I absolutely would not complain here. You don't even need to credit me on that. We've had a lot of Generation 9 Pokemon getting legendary status today, but I promise for our final pick, this is probably the most deserving of the Generation 9 picks. Revavroom had all these cool car forms, and seeing none of them get any legendary status here is a true shame. Because of this, I want to add some actual legendary stats for Revavroom since it's a really cool engine pick that I have definitely no bias towards. Wait, no shit, don't check my channel banner. Anyway, let's start off by changing Overcoat for Clear Body to help avoid any Intimidate drops since we're going to be mostly focusing this Pokemon as a shift gear sweeper. Just in case though, I do want to also add on Levitate as a second ability, as I don't really think that we have any actual reason for any different ability than Levitate, and this will at least give you an actual niche here since with Filter you're just changing any defensive weaknesses. Meanwhile Levitate, it is strictly dedicating to that 4x ground one. For stats, we're going to mostly improve the bulk and speed, as the attack getting a minor buff to 139 should probably be fine since shift gear is a really powerful setup move. And just for good measure, we're going to add on all of the torque moves. Now this is the pick where I mentioned in particular we had more than 4 moves here, but it would make no sense to only add on 1 or 2 of these, and considering the fact that this now gives Revavroom some much needed fire, fighting, fairy, poison, and dark type moves respectively with really good secondary effects, this will help it become a very obnoxious pick. This will be a pretty big deal for Revavroom since these moves are a lot better than the coverage it has right now, such as Temper Flame, since all of these options for the torque moves have really strong secondary effects that'll be very obnoxious to fight, considering options like Blazing Torque essentially are just fire type physical scald. This will make Revavroom into a very, very cool Pokemon for your team, and I think it would be able to kind of tailor a moveset to fit whatever scenario you wanted. For anyone looking for a reason to dislike this video, this next Pokemon is going to be the reason you either become a channel member or the reason that you dislike bomb this video and report it to all your friends. We're going to be making Wobbuffet into our Psychic-type legendary. I like to cause a little bit of mischief and chaos here in case you couldn't tell, and I think Wobbuffet is the most demonic Pokemon I could have been giving legendary status to, as it's definitely the Pokemon that none of you guys want to see on your screen getting buffed. Well, outside of Smeargle, of course. We'll add on 3 insane moves to Wobbuffet's moveset to make it very demonic, with Ruination, Follow Me, and Disable, which will be great options for these closed team sheet settings to improve the choices outside of Counter, Destiny Bond, and Miracle. We're also going to max out Wobbuffet's HP at 255, tying it with the likes of Blissey, making it a true legendary option here. We're going to also improve its speed all the way up to base 113 speed, which will allow it to better utilize moves like Encore and Disable here. And just to make sure, we'll also improve both of its defensive stats to base 108. If 113 speed feels a bit slow, don't worry, because at the very least, we're going to give it Prankster as a second ability here. And while I think a Shadow Tag will be a better choice in most settings, Prankster will be an option that I think a lot of players will have to genuinely consider in closed team sheet, since Prankster options such as Destiny Bond, Encore, and Disable will be very obnoxious. I don't really have much else to say here, but good luck having fun with this. Staying with the gimmick Pokemon, for a Rock-type pick, let's talk about Minior, which was a really cool concept with the ability Shields Down, which allows you to block options like Thunder Wave and Will-O-Wisp in this core form. Because of this, I want to make some very minor improvements to Minior, starting off with the fact that we'll keep both its core and meteor form at 120 speed. We're going to also improve its HP slightly to base 80, and we're going to give it 140 defenses and 90 offenses. Now this is strictly talking about in the meteor form, and with the core form, we're going to switch the 140 defenses and the 90 offenses around. So it will have 140, 140, 120 for offensive stats, making it a very cool Shell Smash win con. This means that whether you're running the newly added high horsepower in tandem with moves like Rock Slide and Acrobatics, or if you're going to add on Hurricane to your moveset to pair with options like Meteor Beam and Shell Smash, that Minior will just be a very cool offensive option that you can kind of tailor to any sort of set you want. And it could really pair well with a lot of different teams. I could definitely see this especially running Hurricane with Shell Smash in tandem with a lot of rain builds that would otherwise just need a really good grass killer here. I don't think there's a lot else we could necessarily do for Minior to make it good because Rock is just such a bad typing, but I think it's at least a very legitimately viable mixed Shell Smash option finally. With just Steel and Water to go, I want to start off with our Steel type choice, which I actually already briefly touched on, but I did mention the hypothetical that we would be making a legendary Aegis last year, and I think the option we came up with would be pretty potent. While Generation 8 did nerf its stats just a little bit, we're going to backtrack that today and then some by increasing its defensive stats in the shield form to 170 and increase both the offense stats to base 70 here. From here, we're going to increase both the speed and HP to base 90, which will allow it to just get some much faster use out of its non-Trick Room sets, and it's also just have some better bulk regardless of if it's in shield or blade form now. Aegislash will be a very good Swiss Army knife pick for your team, especially since we've now added on Poltergeist as a very powerful physical ghost move, as well as Focus Blast, which will be very good for these choice specs movesets running options like Steel Beam already. Finally, for good measure, we're gonna add on Recover because let's face it, with King Shield Aegislash, what type of Aegislash just wouldn't like to run Recover? I think this would be one of the best legendary Pokemon for sure, but how are we gonna handle our water types pick? When planning buffs for today's video, Nick and I kinda agreed that the clear choice of this was Lumineon over every other water type in the book, since we're both Lumineon fans and we both thought this would be a really funny pick. Shout out to our friend Faye who hates this Pokemon though. Faye, we love you, but like Lumineon for life. Now, Lumineon's a pretty cool fish and it deserves some pretty cool stats to boot. Though before we get into the stats, we're gonna add on the fairy typing, since it already has moves like Dazzling Gleam in its moveset, and by adding on Moonblast as a good single target option, this would be a pretty good pick. Just in case you want to run Moonblast as your non-spread option though, we're going to add on Muddy Water, as this will still be a good water type spread move that can potentially drop an opponent's accuracy. This thankfully already has Scald, so we can skip that and instead just lean into supporter moves for these 3rd and 4th move slot options with Taunt and Heal Pulse, since this will give you a good recovery pick that can heal a partner spot while also giving you a good option to disrupt any opposing status moves. Since Lumineon already has some cool options like Tailwind, Safeguard, Encore, and Helping Hand, we don't really need to look into any of these options, so I think Heal Pulse was a fine 4th move here, and for a bulkier teammate, this could be really useful. Now we're going to look into increasing Lumineon's stats, and we have a whopping 220 extra points to boost here. This is going to be pretty split evenly among all of the non-physical attacking stats, and I think that the bulk spread getting to 109, 116, 126 here respectively will be really important for Lumineon, as the water fairy typing defensively is incredible. With 139 special attack though, Lumineon as a support piece will be far from passive, and 121 speed still allows you to outpace a majority of the non-Tailwind prankster metagame. As a taunt pick, this will be pretty cool, as there's not a lot of good fast taunt and Tailwind users outside of Talonflame, but Talonflame is also very pitiful offensively, and with Lumineon in particular, this is also a great anti-rain pick, since with Storm Drain, you draw in any opposing water type picks from Pokemon such as Basculete and Kyogre. So I think this would be a really cool option for your team's legendary spot. If you guys are curious about a Pokemon I didn't buff today though, let me know down below, as I'd love to consider your guys' options. If you want to become a channel member and guarantee I cover your pick in the next video though, if we do a follow-up, hit the button down below, as our current members Zeke Zero and Josh Multiplayer get some extra perks such as emotes in the channel, special badges, and early content for just a few of the many perks you guys get. Also, consider subscribing. We're on the road to 5K and your support would mean the world to me here. And while you're at it, if you did want to see that part 2 I mentioned earlier, let's try and hit our goal of 300 likes in today's video, as if you do hit that, we'll be doing a part 2 for this, as I think this was a lot of fun and I'd love to see some more Pokemon we can maybe make into legendaries here. With that said, also check out our editors Becca and Dose, who make the content on this channel work, and they're both incredible people who do a lot for the channel. And finally, check out the 2 draft leagues I mentioned below, the first being WBG, which is ran by Nick, who helped with a lot of the buffs in today's video, and the second one being the BBL, which I'll be linking down below, which is a singles-oriented draft league that features a lot of different box art legendaries that you normally just don't get to see showcased in a lot of different formats. There's a lot of really big content creators here that I'm sure you guys have heard of if you've heard of my channel, so it would be great, of course, if you guys show the love there, as a couple of my friends are running this league this season and taking over the reins from myself, since I no longer do play singles, and I'm really just hoping that the league does well since it's back to Wi-Fi finally. With that said, I know I plugged a lot at the end of this video, but I just appreciate you guys watching till the end regardless, and I hope to see you guys next week. Peace out, guys.